Let's start our discussion of the influence of the organization by talking about the formal aspects of the situation. And we talk about the formal organization. We're talking about structure, we're talking about levels of authority, and we're talking about the complexity of the organization. Structure is pretty straightforward. These are the roles and responsibilities. We get this from our military chain of command. We can understand this by looking at a SORM, an organization regulation manual, by instructions and directives, and we can understand the rules around that. As midshipmen, mid-regs is our primary source of formal roles and responsibilities and our formal structure. As a leader and as you become a JO, it's going to be really important. You are the one who is going to be the holder of knowledge around formal structure. And so you should always get what we call getting into the pubs. You should get into the directives and the instructions that actually guide your performance. And you should be not just familiar with them, but you should know them cold. You really have to understand what the formal organizational structure is for the unit in which you're going to operate. And to the extent that there is a problem with the formal organizational structure, the answer is not to ignore it. The answer is to change that structure. As officers, it's our job to pay attention to that, to know what structure works and how we need to change it in order to make it work and not to just ignore it. We also need to consider, when we talk about the formal structure of the organization, the levels of authority, and the formalization of that authority and the centralization of that authority. This can get really interesting in a military aspect because our environment is so complex, because it is so volatile and uncertain and ambiguous. We have created over many years in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the military in general, the idea of decentralized leadership and the idea of what we call leadership by negation. So what we ask our subordinates to do is to take the initiative and to start doing things and just to keep us informed rather than waiting for our direction to do things. This is actually a very decentralized form of leadership, and one that the U.S. military holds very dearly, because this helps us to be very successful in these volatile, uncertain, crazy environments. And so how the levels of authority are centralized and how we create the communication among the chain of command and how we get that bias for action is also part of the formal organization that's going to influence you and your leadership. Lastly, I want to talk about the complexity of the organization. Now, when we talk about complexity in the sense of organizational psychology, we talk about three different aspects. We talk about horizontal complexity, we talk about vertical complexity, and we talk about spatial complexity. When we talk about horizontal complexity, we're thinking at the horizontal, we're thinking of the very flat organization. Horizontal complexity means you have lots of peers, lots of people at your level. In the commercial world, again, this is referred to as a flat organization. In the Navy Marine Corps, we have lots of horizontal complexity. There are a lot of people at your level. The CNO is pretty much the only one who doesn't live in a horizontally complex firm. All the rest of you, especially as JOs, you're going to have a lot of people at your level. So all of the JOs get together and they represent that horizontal complexity of the organization. We also have a lot of what's called vertical complexity. If you think of horizontal complexity as being everyone at the same level, vertical complexity is a very long chain of command. And even the idea of a formal chain of command, but one in which there are many, many layers. The more layers there are, the more vertical complexity in the organization. I think it goes without saying, early in plebe summer, you learn all about the chain of command. I think it goes without saying that our chain of command is very lengthy. And frankly, when you get out to the fleet, it's going to be even lengthier because you're not going to be working directly for a 3-star who works directly for the CNO and the Secretary of the Navy. And so there's a lot of vertical complexity in the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then when we talk about spatial complexity may also be considered geographic complexity. And the idea that not everyone is in the same place. Of course, our Navy and Marine Corps are worldwide organizations. We operate across the globe. We are very geographically dispersed. There's a lot of spatial complexity in our organization. Now, complexity in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. When we combine complexity with that decentralized kind of leadership, we can actually be very effective and agile. However, complexity does bring with it some special considerations as leaders. So I want to talk about each of these different types of complexity, and particularly how you need to navigate those as a JO. So the first point is with horizontal complexity. Again, this is a lot of people at the same level. Here, the idea is you need to network. And I don't mean that in a kind of very political way, but just in the sense of you need to get together with people at your same level so that you can pass information, share ideas, and pool resources where required. You're going to do this in the wardroom. The chiefs do this in the chief's mess. Many ships also have a first class mess. Same thing you're going to get in the Marine Corps. But in all of our organizations, we have these informal organizations that allow us to network. You're also going to create some yourself. When I was a Marine Propulsion Assistant, my second division officer tour, we had a pier and then even a waterfront we called the MPA Protection Society. We all knew each other, and we knew that we could call on each other for help when we needed it. You should be doing the same thing as a JO. You need to know who your compatriots are across the waterfront and know how to get in touch with them and know how you can rely on them. And also, of course, make sure that you're helping them out so you can share. When you have that horizontal networking, that really can help you overcome that horizontal complexity. So let's move on to vertical complexity. When we have a very complex, vertically complex organization, it's really on the leadership to be the conduit, to provide that linkage between the upper levels of the chain of command and the lower levels of the chain of command. You as the officer are really the link from the Navy and the Marine Corps to your sailors and Marines. You are really being that conduit. And by the way, this idea of a conduit, it works both ways. So on the one hand, you represent the ship, you represent the captain, you represent the Navy to your sailors. You represent the company commander, the battalion commander, you represent the commandant of the Marine Corps to your young Marines. You are the conduit. And when they look at you, they are looking at official Navy and official Marine Corps. And you need to hold that very closely and recognize that you need to provide information down. And so when information comes to you, you don't just forward it, right? And so this is a mistake that many leaders make. They receive an email from their boss and they just forward it on without any interpretation or ideas. Your job as a leader is to read that directive, read the commander's intent, read the orders that are coming down, and then translate it and explain how it applies to your sailors and Marines. And you provide that further amplifying information. This doesn't mean you don't pass on what's coming from above. You do, and then you add the amplifying information and put your own stamp on it and give an explanation of what this means for us. But the conduit works in the other direction too. You speak for your unit to the upper levels of the chain of command. As a division officer, you represent your division to the department head, to the XO and the captain. As a platoon commander, you represent your platoon to your company commander, to the battalion. This is a two-way street, and you really have to act as a junior officer. You really have to act as the link between these two. And I say junior officer, but of course, this doesn't change as you move through the chain of command. You're always going to be this conduit in this vertically complex organization. And then finally, we talk about spatial complexity. And here the case is you really need to be as present as possible. And we know this from understanding our virtual environments. We know this from understanding geographically dispersed environments. The key here is you need to make your presence known. When I was a OIC of a security detachment in Bahrain, I had sailors all over the Fifth Fleet AOR. And I made it my business. Not only did I have sailors all over the Fifth Fleet AOR, but even where my headquarters was in Bahrain, I had 3 different buildings that were, as it always is, across the base from each other. So I had to make it a point every day, stand up, go and see all of those spaces every day. If you've ever heard the term management by walking around, this is what we're talking about. And then for my sailors who were dispersed across the Fifth Fleet AOR, it was a matter of getting on a plane and flying to Dubai, flying to Djibouti, flying to wherever they were and visiting them where they were working so that I could make my presence known and explain my priorities and make sure that I was really embedding the culture that needed to be embedded. You've already studied the Farsi Island case study. That was an example of a breakdown in this presence mission for a geographically dispersed unit. This was a disaggregated command in which, if you remember, the RCBs were located up in Kuwait, and the CO of the squadron in charge of those RCBs had never even visited where they were and had never gotten the opportunity and really made the opportunity to make his presence known and to lead from the front in that way. So you really have to get out there. Now, I'm explaining at a very a kind of higher, more geographically complex level, but this same thing happens whether you're on a ship or you're in a maintenance crew or wherever you happen to be. You are going to have some level of spatial complexity. Again, my first division officer tour as a communications officer, I had 2 work centers. One was the radio men, who are now called IT men, who worked in the radio shack, which was below the water line on the ship. And then I also had the signalmen, who were all the way up behind the pilot house. Both of those worked for me as a communications officer, so every day I walked up and down to see where my sailors were working. You're going to feel that same thing. You're going to have sailors all over the ship. If you're into aircraft maintenance, you're going to have maintenance units all over the base possibly, or at least at different places inside the building. So you need to make sure you're getting up out of your stateroom, getting up out of your office, walking around and talking to people. Again, make your presence known. This is how we deal with spatial complexity. So look, overall, this is the formal organization. It explains to us the structure, the levels of authority, and the levels of complexity that come with that formal organization. We need to learn how to appreciate it and also how to navigate it. Next, we're going to talk about the informal organization, which really goes hand in hand, and we can't ignore one in favor of the other.